I want you to picture 10 of the most influential money books ever written, laid out side by side on a table. Benjamin Graham is on one end, telling you to calculate intrinsic value down to the decimal. On the other end, Robert Kiyosaki is telling you forget the spreadsheet, just understand the difference between an asset and a liability. John Bogle is in the middle yelling, just buy the index and ignore everyone, including the other 9 books on this table. These men and women disagree about almost everything: what to buy, when to sell, whether you should even pick stocks at all. And yet, if you actually read all 10 cover to cover the way I did, you start noticing something strange. Underneath all that disagreement, there's one idea that every single one of them is circling. They don't always say it directly, but it's there, on nearly every page, in every example, in every case study of someone who built wealth, and every cautionary tale of someone who lost it. And once you see it, you'll understand exactly why you can know all the right financial moves and still not be making them. Here's the lineup. The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Burton Malkiel. Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits by Philip Fisher. The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley and William Danko. Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John Bogle. One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. And The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. 70 years of financial writing. Different decades problems, different audiences. Graham wrote for analysts recovering from the Great Depression. Ramsey wrote for families drowning in 2000s era credit card debt. Kiyosaki wrote for people who'd been told to just get a stable job and trust the pension. Here's the thesis of this video, and I'm going to prove it to you piece by piece over the next 20 minutes. None of these books are really about money. They're about behavior. The math in personal finance is the easy part. Compound interest is not complicated. Spend less than you earn is not a secret. What's hard, what every one of these authors keeps circling back to in totally different language, is what's happening between your ears when money is on the line. By the end of this video, you'll understand the 4 things they all secretly agree on, the one thing they genuinely disagree on, and why that disagreement might be the most useful argument in all of personal finance. Let's start with the clearest version of this idea, because one author built his entire book around it. Morgan Housel in The Psychology of Money. Housel's argument is almost insulting in its simplicity. Financial outcomes are not driven by what you know. They're driven by how you behave, especially under stress, fear, and envy. He fills the book with examples of people with no financial education who became quietly wealthy through decades of unglamorous consistency, right alongside Wall Street trained professionals who blew up their finances chasing one more win. Now here's what's interesting. This isn't a new insight Housel invented in 2020. Benjamin Graham was making nearly the same argument in 1949. Just in drier, more technical language. Graham's most famous concept isn't really an equation, it's a metaphor. He describes the market as Mr. Market, an emotionally unstable business partner who shows up every day offering to buy or sell at wildly different prices depending on his mood. Graham's entire framework, calculating a margin of safety, buying below intrinsic value, exists for one reason: to protect a rational investor from an irrational market, and just as importantly, from their own irrational impulses when that market gets scary. Peter Lynch, managing one of the most successful mutual funds in history, said something similar in his own folksy way in One Up on Wall Street. The investor's biggest enemy is almost never the market. It's their own stomach. Lynch watched year after year as everyday investors bailed out of good companies during downturns purely on emotion, and watched professional fund managers do the exact same thing, just with bigger portfolios and fancier justifications. Three authors, three different eras, three completely different writing styles. One philosophical, one technical, one anecdotal. Same conclusion. The spreadsheet was never the hard part. The second thread shows up in the books that are, on the surface, the most boring. And I mean that as a compliment. John Bogle built Vanguard, and with it, the entire index fund industry on one mathematically boring but psychologically explosive idea. Most people, including most professionals, cannot consistently beat the market. So stop trying. Buy a low-cost fund that owns the whole market, and let decades of compounding do the work no clever trade ever could. In the Little Book of Common Sense Investing, Bogle isn't selling excitement. He's explicitly selling its absence. Boring is the feature. Dave Ramsey takes the same time and consistency idea and applies it to debt instead of investing. The debt snowball method, paying off your smallest debt first, regardless of interest rate, is mathematically not the optimal strategy. Ramsey knows this. He says so. But he's not optimizing for the math. He's optimizing for the one thing that actually gets people to finish: momentum. Small, fast wins that keep a person showing up month after month because the win, not the interest rate, is the engine. And then there's Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez in Your Money or Your Life, who take consistency and apply it somewhere totally different: your relationship to time itself. Their core idea is that money is really a stand-in for life energy, the hours of your one life that you traded to earn it. Track every dollar, they argue, not to shame yourself, but to see clearly what each purchase actually cost you in hours of your life. Once you see that clearly and consistently, spending decisions change on their own. Bogle is talking about index funds. Ramsey is talking about debt. Robin and Dominguez are talking about your sense of time itself. Three completely different domains, same underlying mechanism: small repeated actions, sustained long enough, do more than any single clever decision ever could. Here's where it gets a little uncomfortable, because this thread directly attacks what most people picture when they hear the word rich. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent years researching actual high net worth households for the Millionaire Next Door, and what they found broke the stereotype completely. Most of the people with serious net worth weren't driving luxury cars or living in the biggest house on the street. They were often indistinguishable from anyone else, except they knew to the dollar what they spent in every category, and most people who looked wealthy didn't have anything close to that level of awareness. Robert Kiyosaki frames this same gap as a battle between two father figures in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, one highly educated but financially stuck, the other less formally educated but financially free, because he understood one distinction the other never internalized. An asset puts money in your pocket, a liability takes money out, no matter how good either one looks from the outside. The lesson Kiyosaki keeps hammering is that the appearance of wealth and the structure of wealth are almost completely unrelated. Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez land in the same place from yet another angle. They argue that the entire idea of more equals better is a trap with no finish line, because enough is a moving target that keeps receding the more you chase it. 3 more books, 3 more angles, same conclusion. What wealth looks like and what wealth is are often opposites. The last consensus thread is almost a meta point about the other 3. Nearly every one of these authors deliberately strips complexity out of their own advice on purpose. Bogle's Little Book is short by design. Ramsey's steps are blunt, numbered, and few. There's an implicit argument running through this entire reading list. In personal finance, complexity tends to benefit whoever's selling you the product. The high-fee fund manager, the complicated insurance bundle, the leveraged trading platform, far more often than it benefits you. Simple, repeatable systems survive contact with real human behavior. Complicated ones rarely do. Now, after 12 minutes of consensus, I want to show you the one place these books actually fight each other, because this is the most useful disagreement in the entire reading list. On one side, Benjamin Graham, Philip Fisher, and Peter Lynch all believe a skilled, patient individual investor can identify specific companies that outperform the market. Graham does it through rigorous quantitative analysis, margin of safety, intrinsic value, financial statement scrutiny. Fisher, in Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits, does it almost the opposite way. Through deep qualitative research into management quality and growth potential, famously using what he called scuttlebutt, talking to customers, competitors, and suppliers to understand a business from the inside out. Lynch does it through what he calls invest in what you know, using ordinary, everyday observation of which companies are actually winning in the real world before Wall Street notices. On the other side, John Bogle and Burton Malkiel argue this is, for almost everyone, a losing game. In A Random Walk Down Wall Street, Malkiel lays out the efficient market case, that stock prices already reflect available information so thoroughly that consistently picking winners is closer to luck than skill, especially after fees are accounted for. Bogle built an entire company on the conviction that the evidence overwhelmingly favors low-cost index investing over active stock picking for professionals and amateurs alike. So which side is right? Honestly, both have decades of real evidence behind them. Graham, Fisher, and Lynch all produced real, documented, extraordinary returns using stock picking. Warren Buffett himself has said he's roughly 85% Graham and 15% Fisher in how he thinks about investing. And Buffett's track record speaks for itself. But Bogle and Malkiel can point to mountains of data showing that the average actively managed fund underperforms its index benchmark over long time horizons, once fees are factored in. Here's the resolution I think actually matters. This isn't really a disagreement about math. It's a disagreement about who's reading the book. Graham, Fisher, and Lynch are writing for people willing to do serious, sustained research. Reading annual reports, understanding industries deeply, checking their own emotions at the door. Bogle and Malkiel are writing for everyone else, which statistically is most people, most of the time, most of their lives. And that fault line actually loops right back to Act 1, because the deciding factor in which side of this debate applies to you isn't your IQ or your income, it's behavior, the exact same variable every other author on this list was already pointing at. Can you actually sustain the discipline that active stock picking requires for decades without your emotions hijacking the process? If yes, Graham, Fisher, and Lynch have a path for you. If you're honest enough to say no, and most people statistically should say no, Bogle and Malkiel built the off-ramp. So here's the uncomfortable question this entire reading list is quietly asking you. If 10 books spanning 70 years written by a value investor, a growth investor, an index fund founder, a debt elimination coach, a financial behavior researcher, and a couple who walked away from Wall Street to count their life energy in hours, if all of them independently landed on behavior as the actual bottleneck, what does that mean for your situation specifically? It probably means the financial information you're missing isn't really the problem. Most people watching this video already know they should spend less than they earn. Most people already know panic selling during a downturn is a bad idea. Most people already know lifestyle creep, upgrading your spending every time your income goes up, quietly erases progress. The information isn't the gap. The gap is what happens the next time your portfolio drops 8% in a week, or a friend posts about a sure thing investment, or a 13th straight month of tracking expenses starts to feel pointless. That's the moment every single one of these books is actually written for. Not the calm moment when you're reading a book about money. The other moment, the one where behavior either holds or breaks. So here's the line I want you to take away from this video. The one thing every single one of these 10 very different books, across 7 decades, dozens of contradictory tactics, and at least one genuine intellectual fistfight, actually agrees on. Money problems are rarely math problems. They're behavior problems wearing a math costume. Graham wasn't really teaching you accounting. He was teaching you to outthink your own fear. Bogle wasn't really teaching you fund selection. He was teaching you to resist the urge to do something clever when doing nothing was the better move. Ramsey wasn't really teaching you amortization schedules. He was teaching you to finish what you start. 10 books, 10 different decades, 10 different tactics. One quiet agreement underneath all of it. If you're just starting out and you tend to spiral when the market dips, start with The Psychology of Money. It'll change how you see your own decisions before it changes your portfolio. If you're already investing and want to pick a side in that stock picking versus indexing debate, read Malkiel and Lynch back to back and decide for yourself which kind of investor you actually are, not which one you wish you were. Let me know in the comments which one of these 10 you've already read and which one's going on your list after this. If this video actually changed how you think about your own money habits, that's exactly what it was built to do.